Hello, you are welcome here in my busy little shop. On today's episode of What's on My Workbench, we're going to work on what I think most people commonly refer to as a mechanic's belt. It's a belt that has no metal showing on the outside of it. And it's also good for people that maybe play an instrument like a guitar where they don't want to have an opportunity to scratch their instrument. And then lastly, I've heard people say they've got metal allergies. And so you'll see when we get done with it that the metal that's there is fairly well enclosed. So I'll let you be the judge if it would work for somebody for that. So I hope you like following along on today's episode. And before I get started, if you would hit the bell icon, you'll know when my next video comes out. And if you give me a thumbs up and maybe a comment, and obviously if you're not a subscriber, please subscribe. Hope you enjoy following along. Thank you. All right, so to get started, I've got an 1.5 inch strap of leather here. And I'm going to cut it roughly to length. I mean roughly because once I get it layered up, I will cut my finished point on that end there. This here is actually the narrow one. When I build a typical belt, this would be the top, and then I would trim the liner. But I want to be able to get this put dead center in it, and it needs to be attached through the liner, and I'm concerned about getting that lined up. So I'm going to build this belt I would consider kind of upside down. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make 2 holes here. They're 1 inch apart for the tongues of this piece of hardware to go through. So the first thing I need to do is find the center of the strap for my 2 holes. It's raining a little bit outside, and you might get a chance to hear a little bit of thunder. I heard thunder earlier today. Hopefully the sound of the rain's not too distracting. Then 1 inch apart. Next I'm going to make the holes, and this would be my typical belt loophole, which we'll use this on the other end, but going through here it's a fairly small piece of steel, so I'm going to go to my 3rd one down and make these holes. Well, that will allow this hardware to go through here like that. Then when the belt comes around, it'll hook on the inside of it here. All right, probably makes sense. So next I'm going to cut it to length. I'm going to make a 38-inch belt, and I'm going to cut this strap 10 inches longer than I need. And I'm going to end up probably trimming it a little bit from that. But I want to make sure that I've got enough leather here, so I can always cut it shorter. It's hard to cut it longer. And then I'll check out this. This is my liner, but as I explained earlier, it'll actually be the outside on this belt. So I'll make sure there's no flaws or anything. I don't see any. So I'm going to cut from this end. And I'll give myself a little extra room because I'll trim both ends to length once I get to that spot. Okay. So I've got my 2 straps cut to length. Get my 2 straps cut to length. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to jump over and make my loop. On a typical belt, it's one of the last things I do. But on this one here, I need to get it made early because it will be put in place when I glue this together. All right, the next thing we need to do is we need to cut a strap for the belt loop for the belt, and I like a 1/2 inch wide strap. So I'll cut that from this piece that I cut off the other end of the belt. And then the leather is going to go around 3 layers of this. This leather is 5 to 6 ounce. I checked it. The 2 combined, it's right at 11. So it's about a 5.5 ounce piece of leather. And the way that this is going to work is it's going to go through here and then it will come around and the belt will come back through it. So essentially I'm gonna have 3 layers of leather at that spot there, and they'll be 1.25 inches wide. So the way I'm gonna measure it is I'm gonna come around 3 layers here. I'll mark this with my fingernail. We'll cut that to length. And that's gonna be my belt loop. Now to prepare the belt loop, this is just gonna have it's gonna be sewn together here on the end. I know some people use a leather stapler, things such as that, but I like to just hand sew them. So I need a couple of holes on each side. And a length of thread. And I sew this together in a simple X pattern. And a square knot on the inside. So the next thing I need to do is set up and glue these together with some contact adhesive. Okay, when I set up to glue, I use a piece of cardboard underneath it, and then I work off the edge here. And this helps me keep from getting glue on my countertop and helps keep from getting glue on the edges working off the edge. So I think you'll see here as I work on it. It's a pretty effective way to apply contact cement. And I apply 2 coats. So I'll apply 1 coat to both pieces. I'll let that set up for about 5 or 6 minutes, and then I'll come back and put another coat on both of these. And when I get done, I will come back. And just so you know, I'm going to sew along the edges of this. I'll do it by hand. I don't have a sewing machine. And really, you could skip that part if you wanted. The belt will stay together with the contact adhesive. There's no getting these apart once they're laminated together. All right, so here I'm just finishing up back where I started. I've got 2 coats on the 2 strips of leather, and I'm going to put adhesive on this one area here. Careful not to get too far. All I want is enough on here to keep it from shifting once it's in place there. So the X is going to be the part of the loop that's going to be hidden. I guess X marks the spot in this case. So I'm gonna let that set up for about 5 minutes. It'll get dry. It'll still be tacky. That's the way contact adhesive is. And then once it's set up like that, I'll come back to you. All right, we're back now. The glue is tacky, but not wet. Get rid of this cardboard here. So on this end of the belt, I'm going to trim the top piece to the 1.25" width so that I'm not fighting that. And okay, so I'm just going to come down here about 8 inches, and I'm going to trim off a little bit off this side here. New blade makes a difference here. And no, it's not glued down to it because it wants to stick to other glue. Now I'm going to mark my width on the contact adhesive here. Well, you know what? I'm actually pretty good there. Let me take off just a hair. But I guess I guessed pretty good there on that first one. All right. This will make sense here in a second if it doesn't already. So I'll put this hardware through here. Well, I want to get that the right way. So it needs to be leaning back towards the belt. So when the loop comes around the other way, it hooks on there. So I've got that on there. And I'm going to use the handle opening on my cutting board to help me. The next thing is on this belt loop. That needs to go on here as well. It looks tight, but it won't be when I get done. And I'm gonna put it just behind this metal buckle. It'll have less impact that way on the end appearance. And now I'm going to line this belt here. Overlap a little bit here. I can trim that off, get it to the width, and match up these edges. And I'm just going to work my way down the length of the belt. I could have made both strips the same width. I go back and forth on which is easier, to trim it afterwards or to get it lined up. It's probably about the same challenge either way. And then I'm going to use my glass slicker here. And lightly at first, I'm going to burnish this down. So the first time over, it's fairly light, just to make sure I got good contact between the layers. And now I can lean on it here pretty hard. You can also tap it down with a hammer. Okay. Next, I'm going to trim to the width, so both layers are the same width. When you're trimming it to the width, don't focus so much on trying to cut through all the layers the first time through here. I'm more worried about not nicking this other layer so that I have a nice clean edge. If you have a habit of doing that, you can cut it so it's a little bit wider and then sand it to the width. And I got a brand new blade in here, so I'm cutting through the layers okay. So if you want to more lightly cut and then come back and finish it, it will want to follow that previous score anyway. Got a little bit of an overhang here. I'll have to clean this up on the back side here. Be careful I don't cut the belt loop. Be kind of a bummer. All right, so now the belt is cut to width. The next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to trim off this end with my round over. No, I had to, oh, yeah, here's the right one. I didn't put it away. You know, I'm just going to take about a 1/16 of an inch off of it so I can get both layers matched up the same. All right. So this is going to be the face that you see. This is the buckle here. And then this belt will come around like this, and the holes will hook like that. And this belt strap will go through here. So the next thing I need to do is get this cut to its finished length here. The finished length is 6.5 inches past the hole used. On a belt like this, it's going to be tucked underneath. So if you wanted to make this a longer belt and have more tucked underneath, you could do that. Give you a little more flexibility and maybe not have as many sizes if you're not custom making it for someone. So I will mark 38. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.5. And we're going to put an English point on this, 1.25 inches. It's helpful to find the center so that I get my point centered. Sometimes you try to eyeball that, you're going to have a problem. Now, I'm going to edge these, but before I do that, I'm going to put in my stitch line. I find that I have a better success of getting my stitch line in if I do that before I do the edging. So when I do the stitch line, I start at the tip and work my way back on both. That way, I come around here and I can make my final adjustments here instead of guessing what would come out and be correct at the point. I have to work carefully here, keep my line the same. A little hard to do with that hardware. Okay. Next, I'm going to use the stitching chisels and put in my stitching holes. When I put in my stitching holes, I put leather beneath this. And the reason why I do that is when I drive the stitching chisel through my leather belt, if it gets into this backing, this is Pondo board, and then you tip to kind of pull it out, it puts a lot of stress on these tines, these outside tines. And it seems to me like it doesn't do that when I go into the piece of leather. So that's the reason why I go from here. So I start here at the point, And I work my way down the belt. And I tip the chisel slightly out so that it doesn't want to come out this way and be where I'm going to round over this belt. So I'm going to place some doubled up leather here so when I get to this part I can get the stitching chisel through without damaging the loop on the back. And my experience is that it really wants to come out this way, so you have to be really careful here because you got all these layers up, it's tipping and all that, so you want to really be careful here. You don't want to mess up something you've been working on. All right, to put the holes in here where this loop is, I've stacked up some leather here. And when I compress it, a lot of times it's going to want to come out this way, so I want to really be aware of the angle of my stitching chisel when I have this much leather stacked up, because it's going to want to compress. There we go. Now I just used some blanks of leather stacked up here on that hardware so that when I get to this spot here, I'm not fighting with it wanting to tip around. Other than that, it's done the same way. Watch, make sure I've got it tipped out a little bit here. Okay. Now I'll give one more edit here. Then I'll be past the metal. Just a couple holes past there. Then we'll be on to the tip. Okay. Now I'm just going to work off the edge on this tip. And I'm going to lay out these holes. Working on the tip here, I'm going to just imprint and lay out these holes and make sure I like the spacing, and I can adjust a little bit if I need to. These little marks wouldn't really show once I sew because the thread will cover it. So I can see I'm going to come out pretty good. I'm a little bit tight here, so I'm going to cheat each one of these back a little bit to equal that out. Sorry about that. Kind of tight in here, the camera. All right. Now I've got the holes created around the belt. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do my round over on this. Let me set up for that. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not sure that I did say, but I'm going to do an oil finish on this. If I was going to dye this belt, I would have done this earlier on before I got them layered up. I would have dyed them. So this is going to be an oiled leather finish. So this is a Ron's tool number 3, and I'm going to now round this belt over. Kind of got to work around this spot here a little bit. Kind of a different experience with this metal hardware in here, doing this work. Okay, so now I'll just do the same to the back of the belt. Okay. We're making progress. So next, I'm going to set up and saddle stitch this. All right, to get started, I've cut a length of Tiger Ritza thread. It's 3.5 times the length of the belt. That's enough to do one side. And unlike a regular belt where this would be folded over, this is usually where I end. But since this is the face, I start here and I'll end at the point because that'll be tucked in when it's being worn. And then I'll just continue down through here in a traditional saddle stitch. And I always do each stitch the same. What I mean by that is, if this is the face of the belt, which it is, then I start with that side first with the needle. Then the second needle goes in behind that, the direction of travel. And then we pull the thread through. If you do every stitch the same, then your stitch line will look more consistent. But if I led with the other needle, this one first, on some of these, then it would change the look of this stitch. So this keeps it looking uniform from one end to the other. I had a belt that I had posted on Facebook Marketplace for sale as a hand-stitched belt, and I had someone say, I've been doing leather work for 50 years. I can tell you that's not hand-stitched. So I did correct them and gave them a link to watch one of my videos, but I took that as a compliment that my stitches looked good enough that they thought it was done by a machine. So I'm not going to bore you with the whole length of this. This is how I do it. And it'll just take me a little bit of time here. I'll sew this side, finish it off at the tip, and then I will flip the belt over and I'll sew down the other side as well. And so this belt strip is about a little over 4 feet long, right at 4 feet long. And so it's 3.5 times that, times 2 is the amount of thread that I need to sew in. So that would be 7 times 4, 28 feet of thread that I'll sew in here along the edge. So I will come back when I'm getting ready to finish up the tip to show you how I end my stitches, and then we'll be on to oil on the belt, and we'll be just about done. I need to oil it. I also need to burnish the sides of the belt, give it a nice finish. Hope you're enjoying following along. Okay, so we've got this project here down, getting close to the finish line here. I finished stitching it. When I finished to where I was going, then I backed up 1.5 stitches, and that finishes on the inside. And then to clip the end of it here, you could cut it with a pair of scissors and then melt it with a lighter. I purchased this. I really like it. I had a time or two where I got a little bit of a smoke mark on my leather when I used a lighter. But all you need to do is you press the button here on it, and that element heats up. And then when you apply it to the thread, it just severs it there, melts it off. I leave about 1/16 of an inch that I then melt down and mash flat, and no one will see that. And it won't pull back through. These threads along this belt are more decorative than anything. And so they're not doing a lot of work holding the leather together. If it was, you would want to tie it in a knot before you melt it off there. But the knot on the back of the belt, I don't like that look. If I can keep from it, I don't do that. Then next, I'm going to burnish the edge of the belt here. And to do that, I've got this little sponge here, a small amount of water on the sponge, wet the leather here. And then on natural color, just oiled, you want to be careful not to use something that might transfer some color to it. Like you have to be careful. Some denim might actually put a little bit of blue on the edge of it there and stain that. And then that gives me the edge here. This is going to have an oil finish on it. And I'll put oil on it a couple times. So let me finish burnishing this, and then I will come back applying the oil. And then the last thing I need to do is to put the holes in to adjust the belt. All right, I've got the edge burnished. Next, I'm going to lay out the holes for the adjustment. And those need to be pretty precise, 1 inch apart, because that's the spacing between the two latches. So then what I'll do is I'll get situated on here, and then I'll mark out on each of the inch marks. And I just set my wing dividers to half the width of the belt. Mark them on 1 inch. I come back from the other side to make sure that it's centered. If I have a little overlap or such, I can center my punch on the 2 marks. If there's 2 marks, I've got this one here set exactly to the center. And then I'll come back with my rotary punch. And what I do is I come down and I lightly imprint to make sure I'm centered. I was off slightly, so I just adjust a little bit, and then I punch the hole. And I'll do that for each one of these. Then you can test fit it. This just goes through this back loop here. Pick the 2 holes for the adjustment, and then it connects like that. That gives you a surface here that's just leather and thread. So if you're working on a car leaning against the fender, you're not damaging the fender. Or if you were playing a guitar, you would have a nice smooth piece of leather there so that you're not scratching your instrument. And then my son says if you're riding a motorcycle, A lot of times on the ones where you're, leaning down tight to it, you might scratch the fuel tank as well. So that's another person that could use it. So next we're going to set up and oil this. So next, when I set up the oil, I use a piece of cardboard on here that I use only for oil. I write oil on it so I don't get confused with the one for contact adhesives or such. And what I use is Neat's Foot oil. And I will put that on in a couple of applications. And let me say, the reason why I use the cardboard is then I don't have to worry about cleaning oil up off the counter or forgetting to and getting oil on a piece of leather that I didn't want to have oil on it, which would could affect how dye takes on it. And then I just start down through here and apply the oil. And it could look a little bit blotchy the first application that you're putting the oil on. And don't worry about it. Don't try to over apply it. It tends to even out pretty well as it soaks in. And like I said, I'll come back, put another, probably at least one more coat on there. It lightens up considerably from this darker color that it is right now. But over the life of the belt, it'll continue to pick up, color and darken. And eventually, years down the road, it'll be a dark brown by the time it's done. And then I will go ahead and put a little bit of tan coat on it. You don't want to use Vaseline on an oil belt. Well, I guess you could. One reason why you might not want to do that is if you want to oil the belt in the future, you cannot oil through the Vaseline. But the tan coat is meant to allow you to add oil to it. And you don't have to put a sealer of any type on it. But the reason why I will do that is when I get that last bit of the steps done and I have the tan coat on there, I will come back and I will lightly sand 600 grit sandpaper along the edge, and that will really make that edge nice and slicked out. So that's about it. All I'm going to do is let this sit for a couple hours. I'll come back and put another coat of oil on it after that, and then we'll be ready for the tan coat on there, and then we'll have a finished project that I can show you. Okay, so it's been oiled twice, and I've burnished the edge a little bit extra. I think it's looking pretty good. I'm going to put tan coat on it now. You could put Vaseline in it if you wanted something different. That would work fine. You could leave it just oiled with nothing on it, but I like the satin finish that the tan coat gives it. And it also will allow you to oil the belt later if you want to add more oil to it as part of the maintenance. And it'll darken it up here a little bit as I put the tan coat on it. And just as a recap, it's 2 layers of what was rated as 5/6. I measured it, and it's coming out just slightly over 11 ounces, so it's right in that window. That makes a nice stout belt. Should hold up very nicely, and I don't think you could wear the belt out. It's not going to crack like the belts that have cardboard or whatever between them. I appreciate you following along on this episode on this mechanics belt. I'll post a picture of how it looks when it's finished, but I think it's looking pretty good. Have a great day.